All right. Welcome to United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey. Uh, we're back on site. Just so people here know, we are live streaming this presentation to YouTube as we speak. Just for those of us who cannot get out on location, and for those of us who, have to work. I know my sister likes sometimes putting me on as background noise. So, a couple of reminders for the people who are here. Um, if you do not feel comfortable, please feel free to socially distance yourselves. We do have a couple of scopes open, I believe.
We do.
Um, are any Most of our scopes right now do have the electronically assisted astronomy, where we have, instead of an eyepiece, a camera attached where the eyepiece goes, and that camera takes an image projected on a screen. I don't know if we actually have a telescope open with an eyepiece tonight.
It's possible we do. Marcus is here, so do check them out. There could be some that you could actually look into through the telescope.
Um, Face coverings are optional if you are not feeling sick, or if you're not feeling well, please be mindful. Again, socially distance. Um, Perhaps don't touch the eyepieces. But please do ask questions. Everyone here tonight is a volunteer, and we love getting questions and answering them. We are a nonprofit organization, so we have survived these past few years on everyone's generous donations, and we want to thank you for that. Um, we do have a small sales desk and a small museum display inside the house for you guys as well. Um, Avoid using bright lights. If you do have a bright light, keep it pointed down towards the ground. It's just slightly blinding when you get lights in your eyes. That being said, do use your headlights when you leave. No one likes getting run over. 0 out of 10 would not suggest. I've had it happen. Don't do it. All right. If you do need the bathroom, we do have the porta potty over to my right, your left. And other than that, please visit our website, uacnj.org. That's where you'll find more information about our club and everything. Also, you can check us out on our social media. We have Facebook, our new Discord channel. We have Twittergram, yes, Twitter and Instagram as well. A lot of times we will post upcoming presentations on our Facebook, so do check those out. Unfortunately, tonight we do have a slight program change. Our present, our longtime presenter Lonnie Bunis, unfortunately had a fall, and is taking care of himself and had to seek medical attention. So tonight, in lieu of that, we have our presenter Paul here with his presentation, Anatomy of a Star. We do wish Lonnie that he will get better soon, and that we will see him back here shortly. With that, our presentation tonight, like I said, is Anatomy of a Star instead of What's Up in the April Sky. Paul Fischer has a Bachelor in Chemical Engineering from Stevens Institute of Technology and has worked in the environmental and chemical industries. Though always interested in celestial objects, Paul's official start in amateur astronomy was one night 8 years ago, lying in an awkward position on his roof in the freezing cold. Kind of like tonight, probably. Holding a pair of binoculars. He caught a brief, clear glimpse of the Galilean moons of Jupiter and was hooked. After some introductory reading, he purchased his first telescope, and he is now an active. Actually, tonight's not Anatomy of a Star. Tonight's So You Bought a Telescope.
It is. It is. You bought a telescope, and it's my other presentation, which if you will be here next week, you might see is Anatomy of the Star, but tonight it's You Bought a Telescope.
Man, I'm confused on the days. He Anyway, Paul's now president of UACNJ and an active member of Northwest Jersey amateur astronomers. He still manages to frequently find himself outside at night, in the cold, in awkward positions, seeing neat things in the night sky. And with my awkward introduction done, here's our program.
Hello, everyone. Like Kim said, I'm Paul, not Lonnie, and we wish Lonnie a speedy recovery from his injury. Hopefully we'll be seeing him in the next week or so. So tonight I'm going to be presenting You Bought a Telescope, Now What? This is a slightly updated version. If you have been up here before, maybe you've seen this before. I have a couple of new pictures to show you, but maybe for some of you a familiar friend as a presentation. So the idea behind this, as Kim said, is that we want to bring you from, if you are really new to this amateur astronomy thing, or if you're thinking of beginning it, what are the steps that you could take to become a little bit more telescope savvy and maybe even pick up the hobby. So let's take a look. So as Kim mentioned in my introduction there, the Jupiter and the Galilean moons were what really got me interested in astronomy in the first place. So the big thing here is obviously Jupiter. And I don't know whether sometimes some people in the back here have a little trouble seeing it, but you can see 3 dots on this side and a dot here. And they all seem to go across the equator of Jupiter there. And those are actually the Galilean moons. Galileo himself saw these moons, and some of the theories of gravity, etc., came from these observations of bodies rotating or revolving around another body. So science history really strongly reflects these observations, something that you can see yourself as an amateur in just a pair of binoculars. So you can make the same observations and get a good peek on, hey, this is why we think the things we do nowadays. So a really, interesting thing to observe for yourself. And here's Sir Isaac Newton, whose equations govern a lot of portions of modern physics. And if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. The Galilean moons, obviously, those observations are parts of his theory. And Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and others, you can, by seeing these things in the sky, you are looking at a good portion of the history of science. And so it's an important observation if you're at all interested in science. As I explained, what's this whole presentation supposed to be about? And I explained that maybe we can pick up this hobby or understand it a little bit more. We can also talk a little bit about what is a model and why is that relevant, a little bit about science philosophy there, and then why astronomy is really, really cool, other than just seeing the cool stuff. And I went into that a little bit already. So let's talk about models. What is a model? A model is a simplified representation of an imagined reality that enable predictions to be developed and tested by experiment. And there's a whole realm of, say, normative theory and philosophy where are we actually observing reality, or are we creating thought bubbles in our head that help us approximate reality and navigate reality, but we're not actually specifically understanding the exact nature of reality. And that question, of course, I put this bottom thing a little bit tongue-in-cheek here. Science, philosophy, religion, etc. universally agree that humans exclusively use models to understand reality. That's not true at all. That debate has been going since ancient times, and we are not going to resolve it here tonight, certainly, but that's actually, you know, the idea that models are something that we use to help us understand, as opposed to actually being the understanding of exactly what reality is an important concept to use in science and to use in many other disciplines to fully understand what's, you know, how we do things and why we do things as people. And here's the important takeaway from that. We use a model, the celestial sphere, to understand what's going on overhead at night, especially as amateur astronomers, because what we do is we take the stars and we project them on a sphere, so a globe like you have of the Earth, except in this model we are on the inside of the globe looking up. Okay, and that's obviously not the way we know it happens. We do know that we are on a oh, excuse me, and this globe is rotating around us, and we know that's not what happens, right? That's our perception of what's happening when we look up there, that the sky is moving, but we know in modern science that we're rotating around and the sky is fixed, or at least for our observations, the sky is fixed. So this celestial sphere is a model we use to better understand it and better coincide with our everyday experience. So that's, we understand it better because it coincides with what we see when we just happen to be looking up in the sky. And you can see this celestial sphere has the looking for the red dot pointer. It has all the same things, the celestial poles, as opposed to the South Pole and the North Pole on the globe. So there's the North Celestial Pole, the South Celestial Pole. It has it has an equator itself. It has something called the ecliptic plane, which we'll just go into a little bit later, etc. So just realize that this model is what we use to understand, and that it has many things similar to what you have experienced in social studies on a regular globe. And the other thing you need to know is that amateur astronomy is very big. And how do you digest something that's big? One bite at a time. They say when they say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Amateur astronomy, don't expect to know this model, don't expect to know celestial coordinates, don't expect to know everything in the sky the second you pick up a telescope. In fact, you won't be able to see everything in the sky. It takes you a year. If you were to study everything all the time in the sky at night, it will take you a year to see everything, right? Because that's how long it takes us to go all the way around the sun. So your minimum requirement is a year, but it's probably going to take you multiple years to actually start getting good at picking stuff up in the sky, see everything and start getting used to everything in the sky. Let's start talking about some of the equipment, some of the telescopes and other things you need for this hobby. Everyone's familiar with this refractor telescope. It's your typical telescope you'd think of a pirate would use, right? It would have an eyepiece and a lens in the front, and they'd be looking straight through the eyepiece. And then you have these lines which represent light coming in, crossing through the eyepiece lens, and then into your eye. That's what all these lines are doing. And these eyepieces and lenses are curved, so they bend the light in different directions. And those different directions, when you align them These two happen to be in alignment. That would be called focus, and that focus happens right there in the telescope where you have this. You can see in the case of a refractor telescope a reversed image, and you would see that reversed image as it gets focused into your eye. So that's your typical refractor telescope. Everyone's familiar with that. You might even remember these light paths from an introductory or one of your physics courses. A Newtonian is a different type of telescope. A Newtonian, the light comes in the front there. You might not see these light paths. They're a little bit lighter on this slide. They come in here, reach the back. There's a mirror back here. So as opposed to a lens, you have a mirror. That mirror reflects. It is a curved mirror, so it focuses, reflects on this diamond, diagonal mirror. This diagonal mirror then redirects the light. It does not itself bend the light in any way. It just redirects it out the side and then through an eyepiece here, and then the person would, an observer would look in the eyepiece over here. So Newtonian is a reflecting telescope as opposed to a refracting telescope. The catadioptric, and this is this particular is a Schmidt-Cassegrain. This catadioptric telescope uses mirrors, and it has a similar principle to the Newtonian, but the light comes in and then it hits a mirror in the front of the telescope, and then there's an actual hole in the primary mirror here, and that mirror in the front focuses the light through that hole, and then there's an eyepiece back here which you would look through the catadioptric. Now, why I just said that there are holes and mirrors in the light path in the Newtonian and in the catadioptric. Why are there not black or blank spaces in the image when it comes into your eye? Can anyone guess? Why is that mirror in the way, not really in the way? No one brave enough to make a guess? That's fine. The reason is that anything that you are viewing from a long distance away, and stars are a very, very, very long distance away, the light path is parallel coming into the telescope. So that star, in other words, if I look at the star here, and I walk over here and look at the star, the light path is the same. They're all parallel coming from that star because it's so far away. Such a small angle, doesn't make a difference. They're basically parallel. So what's happening is that you are blocking some of the light, but you're still, since all the light is parallel coming from there, you're still getting the same image from the star at all portions of the mirror. So it's not, so you end up not seeing a dim spot in the, you're not seeing you're not missing part of the image. It is a little dimmer, but you're not missing a part of the image of the star or whatever you happen to be looking at in that telescope. All right, what is a telescope's purpose? Participation again, sorry about that. A telescope's main job is to make objects that are far away bigger. Is that correct, everybody? Yeah, it's a trap, right. No, it's not right. That's not the only reason why we use telescopes. And here's the other very important reason that we use telescopes. The aperture, the opening in front of the telescope is extremely important to observing objects in the sky. And why? Well, right here, this table is somewhat self-explanatory. The naked eye, which we look at the sky with usually, has a radius of 3 millimeters approximately. That radius squared is 9. And then we're just going to divide that area by itself for comparison purposes to get 1 in the beginning there. And then we're going to look at a 4-inch and an 8-inch telescope, do the same thing all over again, and then also divide those areas by your naked eye. And you can see the cross-sectional area ratio goes up to 287 for a 4-inch telescope, and for an 8-inch telescope go up to almost 1200. And that means that that light power, the amount of light that instrument is gathering, the instrument being the naked eye in the first case, and an 8-inch telescope in the last case, that the amount of light that you're gathering goes up by that much, by that cross-sectional area when you are using a telescope. And so what does a telescope do? Let's see if I, nope. I'll use this slide to make that point. The telescope not only makes far things, magnifies far things, but it makes dim things brighter. So you can see nebula and stuff like that that are too dim for your naked eye to pick up in a telescope. So it makes dim things brighter too. So that's also a very important job of a telescope. We talked a little bit about eyepieces. I said that the primary mirror lens existed, and then there was an eyepiece associated with the telescope. It turns out that you need both that primary lens, which is very important, but also that eyepiece in order to create an image. Remember, those two things focusing together is what created that image in that first telescope. So what are eyepieces? This first line here is just examples of various types of eyepieces. This Nagler here is, I think I go into it later, but this Nagler here is a proprietary version, and these are more generally available versions of eyepieces. What is an eyepiece? An eyepiece is has multiple or compound lenses with coatings to eliminate image distortion. So if you see things in a curved mirror, like say one of your backup mirror, one of your side mirrors on your car, you notice that the image is somewhat distorted. Well, these eyepieces not only create that focus point, but because of these multiple or compound lenses and coatings, it eliminates or helps normalize the distortion related to having a curved lens or mirror. On the side of them, there's a focal length expressed in millimeters, so you know what you're buying or know what you have. They come in 1 1/4 or 2-inch version. The 2-inch gives you a larger view of the sky. Medium grade eyepieces, just a warning on cost. If you've planned your budget for a telescope, you have to plan for eyepieces too. Medium grade eyepieces can rival a beginner's scope's value. So you have the cost of the telescope and the cost of the eyepiece. You have to think about both of them when you're thinking about investing in a telescope. These are specialized eyepieces down here. Not only they're not proprietary, they just happen to do other things. You can buy ones with a reticle in it, Barlow that provides additional magnification, an angle viewer to make it more comfortable to look through the eyepiece. These things exist. And learn your scope. My recommendation anyway is to learn your scope with your default eyepieces. Most telescope companies will sell you a beginner's telescope with default eyepieces, and then maybe a Barlow that Barlow, say a 2 times Barlow, you had one eyepiece with a Barlow, now all of a sudden you have two eyepieces, two magnifications that you can use for the telescope. And remember, that eyepiece primary is what creates the image inside the telescope. If you change out an eyepiece for one with a different focal length, that changes the size of the image and therefore changes the magnification available to you. So keep that in mind. The Barlow will basically double the amount of eyepieces that you have in that case. Some more eyepiece terminology, just you don't have to memorize this, just to gain a familiarity. There's exit pupil associated, that's the image height exiting the eyepiece. There's eye relief, how close your eye needs to be to the eyepiece in order to see the image. There's the apparent field of view and the true field of view, which are calculations, very complex calculations that we'll go into at the end of the presentation. And again, that's not really true. I'll show you what that is. Another thing to consider about telescopes is how you align it to the sky. And the way you align it to the sky is using a mount, and there are options available to you. The first one is the altitude azimuth, the Alt-Az mount. For instance, I have a Dobsonian. No, the Greenwood is Newtonian, but not a Dobsonian. I don't know whether we have a what's that called, a example for that currently. We probably have one inside, so I'll be inside and I can yeah, you step inside and I'll show you a Dobsonian mount with a Newtonian telescope. What's their advantage for the Alt-Az? It's easy to set up and it's intuitive to use. If you think a artillery, we used to play, that line art game where you tried to artillery each other on a computer. If you're thinking about that game, that's how you steer this particular type of telescope. And it's telescope centric. In other words, all your calculations on or thinking of how you move the telescope around is based on how the telescope currently is sitting, and it's not based on where things are in the sky. An equatorial mount is a different type of mount. Most people use a German equatorial mount. It's harder to set up and it's less intuitive to move. It moves based on the arc of the sky. So if you think about the sun going across the sky, this mount will move the telescope in a similar direction. It is used a lot of times for electromechanical tracking of anything. So many, especially astrophotographers, many go-to scopes will have this configuration. And it's sky-centric. So once you align that scope properly, it can follow the coordinates of things in the sky. So it's convenient for finding things in the sky easily, but also for doing a little bit more sophisticated things like I said, astrophotography. Push to and go to with modern electronics, computers, and controllers for amateur astronomy makes your mount choice less critical if you're observing. So you do have alt-azimuth mounts that are electronically controlled. The field will rotate in the telescope if you have an alt-azimuth go-to mount. In other words, if you leave it on the same thing all night, you'll see it lying on its side when it rises, straight up and down during the middle part of the night, and then as it sets, it'll be on the other side, so it'll rotate. With the equatorial mount, it'll be oriented the same in the telescope your whole journey through the sky. Other accessories you might use: a red flashlight or a dim regular flashlight, a red dot finder or fixed focus finder scope, green laser pointer, broadband filter. Some filters help you see various objects a little bit better. A case for your scope to keep it nice, especially when you're traveling, and a bench or chair. Why is a bench or chair very important besides comfort, do you think? Who said that? Excellent, excellent, exactly. Not only is your telescope mounted properly and stable so that it's not vibrating when you're looking through things, because you're looking through a very small angle, and that little vibration can cause major problems with your view, but you would also vibrate being human. If you sit down, you're a lot more stable, and therefore not only is your telescope stable, but you're stable and your view will be that much better. So it's actually an important, besides comfort, it's actually an important accessory. Let's talk a little bit about vision. We talked a little bit about using bright lights here tonight. It takes 30 to 45 minutes for a full adjustment of rod cells. That's why we try to avoid using bright lights here when you're using astronomy. However, safety trumps everything. So like we said tonight, all bets are off, headlights on. We have kids and people are moving around. So when we leave, definitely use your headlights. Averted vision helps. So what is averted vision? Your rod cells, if you remember, you have your cone and your rod cells. Your cone cells are looking straight ahead. Your rod cells tend to be in your peripheral vision. So averted vision is that you'll actually see things in the dark a little bit better. I see people over here in the dark a little bit better than I see people straight ahead. But that's true looking through a telescope too. You look through the telescope and don't look directly at the object, but you move the telescope a little bit. Keep it still in the field of view, but not in the center of your view, and you can see things a little bit better, dim objects a little bit better, even in pre-programmed. Am I still on there? So some telescopes actually have this pre-programmed. Motion helps, so it'll jag back and forth a little bit, but you can do that in your own non-motorized telescope. You can move the telescope back and forth a little bit, or even your eye back and forth a little bit, and you will see dimmer objects better when they're moving, even if it's apparent motion. Even when they're not moving and you're moving, you'll see it a little better. Your brain is just wired that way, so that's why it works. And surface brightness, a little bit about surface brightness. It's possible for dim objects to focus past their brightness. In other words, if you can see it as a small thing in your object, you can magnify it to the point where it becomes so diffuse that the square area, little square area of it, isn't giving off as much light as the entire object is, and therefore you can no longer see it with your particular setup. So it's possible to magnify it beyond your ability to see it. So that concept is called surface brightness. So let's talk about learning the sky. It's not pie in the sky. First of all, the first thing you want to do is lose the scope in order to appreciate the scope. So look up and start learning the sky a little piece of that at a time. As we said earlier, take a little bite of that elephant, one piece at a time. Look up and just start appreciating what various constellations you can identify in the sky. Some navigation aids we'll talk about. Your cheating brain we'll talk about. And then finally, sky parties and other events that you can attend. So here's some navigation aids we'll go into. And I'm about to do, you have that light? Aha. So we're going to go into a little bit about navigation aids. Let me just briefly go over these slides, and then I'll give you an example of how to use one of them. This is the Planisphere. We'll go over this one. This is a very basic. It starts helping you learn where the constellations are in the sky, what time of year they happen to be up. So very useful, especially when you're first starting out. These star atlases, the Cambridge Star Atlas, I have actually a copy here tonight, and this Millennium Star Atlas. This one is very field usable. It goes to a 6 magnitude. 6 magnitude are brighter stars. The lower the number, the brighter the star in magnitude. 11th magnitude are dimmer stars. And as you can see, this is a thin atlas similar to what a map, a county map you would find in a or you used to be able to find in a drugstore or in a gas station. 11th magnitude atlas has dimmer stars in it, but as you can see, there are many more dimmer stars than there are bright stars, and this would be something that you would keep on a shelf in your office and not something that you would take to the field with you. All right, and then Star Atlas apps are the other way to do it. These are becoming more and more prevalent. The two that I personally use are Stellarium and Sky Safari, but there are other very similar apps out there that you would you might use. They combine the ability, you can see there are some dots here, and you can orient the constellations, but is by no means very inclusive of all the stars in the sky, so it's of limited help finding specific stars. And then these guys are more useful for that, more difficult to use, and then this guy combines the utility and usability. So Star Atlas are certainly a good choice. All right, and let me go into the how to use a planisphere. One feature that you might want to realize. So, can anyone tell me what's wrong? This is a planisphere without all the star detail, the pesky star detail that we don't need to know right now. So, what's wrong with this planisphere, the way it's oriented? Yeah, east and west is backwards. Now, if you remember, in the beginning we talked about the globe and the difference of the sky celestial sphere as opposed to a normal globe. And so if I look at this as north, south, east, and west, and it's wrong, that's because I'm looking at it like this, like I do a normal map. And north is that way, south is that way, so that would make east this way and west that way. So yes, it is indeed wrong until I orient it correctly up at the sky, and then as you see, north and east, it now corresponds correctly to the correct directions. So don't look at it like a map like this way, but a map this way, and then it makes sense. And that's true for any of those navigation aids that you saw. East and west is going to be backwards because we're looking that way instead of that way. Okay, objects, stuff you can find in the sky. In order of appearance. In other words, if I just bought my telescope today and I wanted to start looking at things, the first thing I would look at is at the moon. Then I would look for planets, the 5 usual suspects. In other words, the 5 easiest ones to find would be Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They're the easiest. Stars are easy to find, but it takes a little bit of knowledge to know which one's which, right? And those planispheres and navigation aids will help you with that, learning those in just experience and time. And then deep sky objects, I would rate those as, you know, similar to stars and their ability to find. Here's some of the four neatest things to see: globular clusters, open clusters, nebulae, and galaxies. I particularly like galaxies, but all of them are really cool objects to see. The outer planets and asteroids are more difficult to pick out. You have to know star hopping, you know, pretty good star hopping techniques to be able to find them manually. Go-to scopes, so once you've set up, have understood how to set up and configure and align your scope properly, all these things become relatively easy, but even that requires a little bit of knowledge. And then transient objects, so things like comets and other things people like to see satellites go across. These are things that don't happen necessarily every night, so the transient objects, you have to have a little bit more specific knowledge and a little bit more ability to find things in the sky in order to catch transient objects on a regular basis. Another thing, you know, where am I getting all these objects from? Like, how do I know what to look for and what to look at? Well, those navigation aids help you, but there's also these lists. And these lists that are typically, you can get them independently, look them up online, or have an atlas with them included, or a reference with them included. But what are these numbers and how are they developed? Well, two of the lists that you'll come across early on and more frequently are the Messier catalog and the NGIC catalog. The NG or the NGC-IC catalog and the Messier catalog stand, well, M is the designation for Messier, and NGC-IC is for the New General Catalog Index Catalog. The Messier catalog was compiled by Charles Messier, who was a comet hunter, and he discovered 12 of them, so an accomplished astronomer. Ironically, it is a list of objects to avoid because they are not comets, and it is the most used list of things that we now look for as amateur astronomers in the sky. So it's the list has a little bit of irony associated with it. It originally had 103 objects, and it currently has 110. And these are some of the easiest or the brighter objects, deep sky objects to find in the sky. The NGC-IC catalog was compiled by John Louis Emile Dreyer, and he built upon the work of the Herschel family in order to compile this list. It is, again, it's the New General Catalog or the Index Catalog. It originally contained almost 8,000 objects, and then it had two major objects, two major updates, totaling another, additional 5,000 and change objects. So that's what the IC Index Catalog is they, instead of releasing a totally new catalog, they just added on to the NGC catalog. It has been since revised a number of times and is now called the revised NGC-IC catalog officially. All right, and then finally, what are we going to see when we use the telescope to look at things? First of all, detail. And this is with my old telescope, and with just a cell phone camera, I was able to take this picture of the moon to give you some appreciation of what you can see of the moon when you take a look at it through a telescope. And it's not a bad image for that setup. In the stars you might think are boring points of light. Well, not necessarily. You get to see some differences associated with it. This is our brightest star in the sky, which is what? The moon is brighter, but is not the star. So this is the brightest star, and this is Sirius. The sun is actually our brightest star in the sky, but we'll just call the sun for now. But it is a star, and all the stars are suns. But this is our brightest nighttime star, Sirius. And then this color, you can see maybe a difference in the blue and red here, and you can actually see in the telescope that color differences in stars, which is an important realization, understanding a little bit more about stars, which if you're here next week, we'll talk about a little bit more. Outer planets, if I remember correctly, this is Neptune, different color. What you can see here, why is this different than a star? In the telescope, observing, I can see that it's different than a star because it's no longer a point of light. It has some thickness to it compared to the stars I see through the telescope. That thickness means that when I magnified it, it got bigger, all right? And it means that it's a close object. Stars are so far away that you try to magnify them in our amateur telescopes here, they don't get bigger because they're so far away, they just remain little points of light. So I could tell this was a planet. Well, this isn't my photograph here, unfortunately. So this person here who took this picture could tell that was a planet because they call it resolving the disk. The planet got bigger when I looked at it through it had width to it compared to stars, and therefore that's a planet, not a star. All right, and I said we'd get to the math as far as what field of view, how we can detect field of view, and we will talk a little bit about field of view right now. This very complicated formula here is how you calculate true field of view from your actual field of view. Your actual field of view is provided to you by your eyepiece manufacturer. Your magnification here is you will calculate up here. So your true field of view equals the number provided to you by your manufacturer divided by the magnification. So how do we get the magnification? You get the focal length of your telescope, which is provided by your telescope manufacturer, and you divide it by the focal length of the eyepiece, which is provided to you by the manufacturer of the eyepiece and is actually printed on the side of the eyepiece. So your focal length of your telescope divided by your focal length of your eyepiece equals your magnification, and then you get your true field of view from that. So why is that all important? Why am I emphasizing the true field of view? Why is that important for us to know? Thank you, Kim. Well, here we go. This is your true field of view, theta. And if your true field of view happens to be equal to the length of the object you're looking at in the sky, then it'll be exactly the length across your field of view in your telescope. So that's an important thing to know to see whether it fits in your the eyepiece that you've selected or not. But you can also do calculations based on it. Say it's somewhat smaller, and you know that 4 of them fit across your eyepiece, and you know your true field of view. Well, now you know how big that object is off of just observation and knowing the math and knowing your telescope. You can actually do that calculation to come up with the approximate size of the object. And if you know how far it is and you know the angle it makes in the sky, then you know actually how big that object actually is in light years, or whatever the units happen to be. So you can actually do calculations from your observations if you know the true field of view of your telescope. So it's a simple math, and it's an important concept to get. And that things are, thank you very much, Kim.
I'm actually going to bring it closer to the filter.
Okay, thank you. And so it's actually an important thing to start getting used to doing some of those calculations. It's an important concept to get. You don't actually have to do the calculations if you don't want. All right, and just a little bit, we're not going to talk about too much because it starts we can't get too far into it because without seeing the actual navigation aids, it's difficult to talk about it a little bit. But coordination system madness, there's two ways to do it: altitude and azimuth. Azimuth is how far east of north, and altitude is how far above the horizon you are. Right ascension and declination. Right ascension is how far east of Aquarius you are, and declination is how far above the equator you are. And then you have to realize that unfortunately the choice of units of these can be somewhat confusing. So if you are getting into azimuth and altitude and right ascension and declination, you have to realize that the angle of things make in the sky, which are arc minutes or arc seconds, are different than the units of right ascension. And right ascension is also in these angle measurements, but they are not equal. 15 degrees of arc per hour, or 15 arc minutes per minute of right ascension equals, and I didn't write that out all the way, and I'm tripping myself up here, excuse me, one unit of right ascension. So it's not a one-to-one conversion. So I think that's correct. Check me as part of homework, but just realize that right ascension and degrees of angle are not the same units. You have to convert between them. One more technique I want to go to, and sorry, Kim, I'm going to make you get up again, is talk about a little bit about star hopping. And thank you very much, Kim. And star hopping here, that's Bob the Accountant, which is a fake constellation in our sky. And Bob here has this object that we want to see, which is the M401K nebula right here. And we want to find it. But this is a dim object that we can't see, and we want to find it with our telescope. Well, what we would do is we can see this star, very bright star, it's bigger. So on the chart here, so we know it's. So what we would do is we would find this star in our telescope, because we can point our telescope pretty reliably to a bright star, and then we would say, oh, it's up this way, and then we could just go down a little bit and we can find this dimmer object. And that's the whole concept behind star hopping. So we could star hop along Bob here to the M401K nebula and find, what's that? Correct. We know where it is on this reference that we have here, our navigation aid. We looked it up and we know it's there from the navigation aid, but we can't find it in the sky. And so, but we can find this star because it's nice and bright in the sky.
So basically you have to know the steps.
You create the steps, right? You look at Bob the Accountant on the navigation aid in the map, and you say, I got to go from this star to this star to this star to here, and you create that in your mind, and then you can do that with the telescope, one piece at a time, and then get to what you want to look at. And that's called star hopping. And that's one method of finding things in the sky. And as it says, thank you very much, Kim. And then you say, but I have a go-to scope right here. But I have a go-to. Yeah, but you're not going to avoid it completely because first of all, you need to align your scope in the first place, and sometimes that requires knowledge of bright stars, at least in the sky. And then second of all, I can guarantee you your go-to scope is not going to center every time on the, it can very well center very well many times, but eventually, if not often, you'll run into a problem where it doesn't immediately go to the object you want to see, and you have to have that knowledge of star hopping a little bit and figuring out where things are based on being relatively close to the object. So it's a good skill to have regardless of whether you have a go-to or not. All right, so last thing, star hopping. This is one example you could use. This is Vega. Vega will be up later in the year. Vega is a very bright star, so it has a very big circle there. And Vega here in the constellation Lyra, if you go across the constellation, it's pretty quick jump. 1, 2, 3 stars. And you can actually see these stars with your naked eye, so it's really not that difficult at all. But if you go from Vega, 1, 2 stars from Vega, or a total of 3 stars, and then in between these two stars at the end of the parallelogram here, right in the middle, is the Ring Nebula. And it might be your first star hopping experience if you pick up the hobby. Sure. They do, in fact, can get bigger at the end of their life. They do, some variable stars will actually change their diameter and their brightness, etc. So those processes do happen. Whether you would just be able to do it without careful observation and making mathematical or instrument measurements with instruments and stuff like that, just casual observation, you might not be able to tell it unless it turns into a giant star. What's that? Correct. I mean, people did start doing these calculations just by observing it with their eye and comparing it to other stars. So a very avid amateur person, or professionally, of course, they use very sophisticated instruments nowadays, but a very avid amateur would be able to eventually notice a difference.
I do ask because we will be having a question and answer session. Wait till the end because I will be bringing the mic around so that people online can also hear the questions.
You're fine. You've added to my presentation, so thank you very much. And some homework for everybody. Any of these books are excellent references to begin the hobby. Another thing to do is UAC&J here is a club of clubs. So any of our local member clubs, if you join those clubs, you can become a member up here also. But the clubs themselves, of course, do very similar things to what we do up here. So joining an astronomy club, we love this hobby and we love to talk about it. So you can certainly pick up a lot of pointers and et cetera, just rubbing elbows with other amateur astronomers. Wanted to talk, and this is for those of you who this is seen this, I have a little bit of a new thing added to my presentation here. The other really effective way to gather light, we talked about the telescope was a very important light gatherer. It makes dimmer objects brighter because it has light power. It can gather more light than our naked eye can. Astrophotography in EAA is the other way to do it, by exposure length. The longer the exposure, the more light coming into the device. The complexity and expense of astrophotography and EAA are at a different level than just buying a telescope. It's a lot big. It's a lot more. So you want to maybe get used to just using your telescope before you start down the EAA or astrophotography path. EAA stands for Electronically Assisted Astronomy, and it's sort of taking a snapshot of the sky as opposed to being an actual photographer. So it's more just taking a quick family picture as opposed to going out to a professional photographer and having him take a portrait. You're surrounded by skilled astrophotographers here. There are many people here, including tonight, who have a long experience in astrophotography, so do ask them questions. And here's some of my I've just begun the path, and this is different from when I presented this last year. I've just begun the path of pursuing EAA, and here are some of the neat things you can do with EAA. So this is the Crystal Ball Nebula, NGC 1514, which you wouldn't necessarily be able to see very well in just a telescope. So I'm gaining more light power by having a longer exposure, and you have to do things called stacking and things like that, but this longer exposure is what's allowing me to see a dimmer object. Very bright, but this is actually the core of the Andromeda Galaxy, or the brighter central section of the Andromeda Galaxy, with this more like being the core, and it's actually very much bigger than what I'm showing you now. It actually would go quite a big. So this is actually a pretty magnified view of the center of the Andromeda Galaxy. This is the moon, which compared to the other, you can see a little bit more contrast between the darks and the lights, and a lot more detail on the moon. And this is Caroline's Rose, which you can actually see some of the dimmer stars that you can actually sort of see the petals here, right? You can actually see why it's called Caroline's Rose. There's a good pattern of stars. And this is an open cluster. And again, you can see this is the NGC 7759. So it's on that the NGC list of objects to see. So I've actually begun astrophotography. I'm a very new beginner to not astrophotography, but electronically assisted astronomy. So I'm looking forward to learning more about this aspect of amateur astronomy. And I think that was the last, yep, that was the last slide. So what that was reminding me was to put up this last bit of, well, actually, before I do that, let me put this back, is to ask anyone here if you have any questions for me.
All right. So thank you, Paul. So thank you, Paul, for a great... Yep, we will get to questions shortly, hon. And I will bring the mic out so that, like I said, people online can also hear the questions. I want to thank you, Paul, for a great presentation. I want to thank you all who've come out to watch, and for everyone online who has watched. I have been keeping track of our online chat through my phone and my computer that I actually have over there. So before we get into Q&A, we're just going to go over a couple reminders. I know some people are probably antsy with it being cold to get up and maybe see if any of the scopes are open. So a couple reminders. If you are using a light, do keep it pointed down towards the ground. No one likes getting a random bright flashlight to the eyes. That being said, do use your headlight as you leave, because no one likes getting run over. I did not enjoy getting hit. 0 out of 10, do not recommend. If you do need to use the bathroom, we do have the porta potty available to my right, your left. Also, check out our gift shop. Proceeds from that do, and all the donations that you do go to support us, keep our lights on, and keep us able to offer free public programs. Because we are a completely nonprofit and volunteer based organization. Okay, so uh, with that, like I said, check out our website, uacnj.org, and also check us out on our social media. With that, we're going to get into our question and answer session. Because we do have a mixed chat where we have people here and people online, I'm going to kind of do one from you guys, one from uh, our online audience. And to start us off, uh, one of our first online questions was, how does it feel to be back on site?
Feels good. It's a little chilly, so we got that. I actually, as I said, new to EAA, so I actually avoided the cold a little bit this year. It's a new scope to me. I didn't want to fumble it in the ice and snow or when my fingers were cold. So it's actually doubly good because I'm looking forward to getting back to the EAA learning curve with the warmer weather, hopefully soon, so that I can, further learn that and have fun with that. So it's good to be back on site. Looking forward to especially the warmer weather.
Right. I know you had a question next. Let's go to you. Hold on, hold on. Let me bring you the mic.
I was just wondering, that was named after a person, Caroline, somebody or other.
Caroline's Rose.
Yeah, was it named after a person?
I
know they named
that's
stars.
an excellent question that I cannot answer because I
Oh.
don't know the answer to the question, unfortunately.
Because I know you could do a thing where you name a star after somebody, or
I don't. I think it was probably named before that existed, so it's probably historically named that. So I don't know necessarily whether it's related to one of those programs, but I don't know the actual origin of it.
Right. So our next online question is, how often do star atlases need to be rewritten or updated due to potential shifting and changing of the stars and possible positions?
Yeah, they definitely have official guidelines, and I don't know the guidance on that, but we are, I think, in like Epoch 2000 currently. So there are the it is definitely periodically updated, but what what the standard frequency for updating it is, I don't know, because those stars do shift, and there are people who do astrometrics that are constantly updating this information, and those lists are published for, and those epochs are stated in the atlases, for that reason, because they do need to be updated. So that's a very good observation. I don't know what the, like I said, the standard pace of that happening, but definitely something to look at. If you're looking at an older epoch, then you are you're not. It's just not current information. So you have to make sure you have the most current.
Yeah. So perhaps not every year, but every
Uh,
probably 5 to 10 years.
I
I'd
think
probably
I think
say.
I'm guessing. So check me. But something like in the 10-year region.
I would imagine positional data is less likely to change as what is also there, because we are discovering new things all the time thanks to scopes like the James Webb that's now up and running.
No, it's
And
definitely positional data too, because especially nearer objects are going to move further in the sky, and our stars are always moving. There's we as amateur astronomers, we're not going to notice, just like I said, without taking sophisticated measurements. We're not going to necessarily notice, but they do move, and they do move away from us, towards us, left or right, up or down, compared to where we are currently. So they do move around. So the position is very definitely changes.
All right. Was there another question from you guys out here? Oh, let me get.
Has there ever been an experience where, like, for one of the major constellations, one of those stars dies?
Has there ever been? So ever is 14 billion years. So the answer is yes. But but major stars, there are ancient Chinese or Far East anyway, astronomers, and even European astronomers. Some of that stuff, some of those important events happened in the Dark Ages, so some of those records are hard to come by. But certainly in the far reaches of from us, the world, there are records of nova, supernova, those things happening, of notice of stars that they've noticed. The star was there, the star's not. It was bright in the daytime, and they made detailed records of those things. Astronomy was used for date keeping and things like that. So it was a studied science even in ancient times. So those things were noted, and those records are available, or have been studied. And so yes, stars disappearing has been noticed even in ancient times. Thank you.
Right. I think I have one more question, and I'm just putting out a last call for questions online. Someone asked, are you possibly when we were talking about the Dobsonian Mount, I would imagine, are you thinking of the Worms game for the artillery style of?
Not Worms, where you were.
You're like a worm that's angry and has a bazooka or something. Everyone knows that game, I think.
This is back a long time ago. It was a line. It wasn't even using sprites like I imagine the worm game. The worm game that I remember, the worm got longer and longer, and
I think that's Snake.
Yeah, Snake. But so the one I'm thinking was actually line drawings, and you calculated the elevation, and you would then shoot the other, and you would have turns back and forth to see whether you could destroy the other artillery across the computer, and across the computer screen. And so that's what I was thinking, is that it's a simple movement up or down, left or right. So it's more artillery-like in that nature. So the alt-azimuth mounts are a lot more intuitive to move than your equatorial mounts.
All right. Was there another question out here? Oh, I got one.
Can you help me understand between the globular clusters and the open clusters that you mentioned?
Sure. I didn't include a picture of a globular cluster, so I will not refer back to the pictures I had there. But if you remember the open clusters, they were the Caroline's rose we were talking about. It was wide open and spread out, and this particular star cluster happened to sort of look like a rose. And open clusters tend to be more loosely gravitationally bound, and therefore more spread out. They are definitely denser areas with a lot of stars in them, so they're noticeable from other places in the sky. But globular clusters, if you take the globe root of that, then you now understand why the globular clusters are different. The globular clusters are densely packed globes of stars that you see in the sky. But not only that, they are not loosely gravitationally bound. They are very rigidly gravitationally bound, or more rigidly gravitationally bound. They might have a completely different origin. In fact, they're some of the oldest objects in the sky, as opposed to open clusters, which tend to be younger objects in the sky and have a different origin. And at least the theory is that they have a different origin than open clusters, so a different mechanism for how they even came about. So globular clusters and open clusters not only look different, but are different objects for many other reasons too. Globular clusters are older, so if anything, it would be the reverse, but they're not. They're just they have different origins and are not the same objects, so they don't go from one to another. Globular clusters might be a proto-galaxy that never got going, or a cannibalized galaxy. So they are really old objects. They're starting to get to the age of the universe, as opposed to open clusters, which are newer stars that are just coming around, that evolved from the same cloud of gas. So they have different origins and are different objects, and they look different too. Mm-hmm.
All right. Was there another question out here? I hear crickets. All right.
Thanks,
So,
everyone.
once
Stay
again,
warm.
Thank you, and have a good night.